Hi, I'm Jay Clark. I'm here in Victoria, British Columbia at Vancouver Island Brewing. We're gonna head inside. We're gonna do a bit of a deep dive into different beer styles and talk about the best way to serve them. This is Here for Beer. I'm here with Dave Pearson, who works in business development at Vancouver Island Brewing. And Dave's gonna talk us through some tasting of some of the different beers that they make. But before we get into that, Dave, and start having some fun, can you tell us what makes Vancouver Island Brewing so special?
Yeah, we're kind of a pioneer in the Canadian craft brewing industry. We've been around for about 35 years now.
A long time.
It's changed a lot in that time. So we've been around for a long time. Even the equipment we have kind of reflects that. They didn't make a lot of the equipment now back then when we opened. So we basically have the smallest big system that you could get, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of gives us some scenic abilities. And our brewing side, one of the things that really helps us do is to make crystal clear, really nice lager, which is a great thing because obviously we have a brewmaster who's of German heritage. So it's obviously a big deal for him.
His lagers. Yeah,
he does, and how.
Well, and I mean, that's a great segue into the first beer that you're going to taste us through today.
Yeah.
Is a lager.
It is, yeah. So this is our Victoria lager, aptly named because we're in Victoria, which makes sense. So the style on this beer is a Dortmunder Export. So Dortmunder Export in the sort of German lager tradition kind of fits in between a Munich Helles and a Pilsner. So out of the three most popular pale German lager styles, this one probably hits that sort of middle hop character and body notes.
There's a lot of discussion always about lagers and ales, and not always a lot of clarity for everyone on what the difference is between those two beer styles. Could you give us a quick sort of rundown on that?
Yeah, of course. So lager is basically fermented at colder temperatures for a longer time. So what that does is basically the yeast works a lot slower and it's a lot cleaner and a crisper flavor. Whereas in ales, which are fermented at the top and for a shorter period of times, you're getting a lot more sort of chemical reactions, which can create some phenolics and some esters. So you're actually getting a yeast character. So the main difference with a lager is it's going to be quite crisp and dry, and you're not going to get any of those yeast flavors like you would in, say, a beer like a Hefeweizen that might have banana or clove characteristics.
Perfect. So we're going to taste lots of cleanness on this.
Yeah, totally nice, super crisp. This beer, because it's a German style and we have a German brewmaster, it's very true to that style. So when people kind of ask me to describe it, very simply, I'm like, think European lager as opposed to North American lager. So on the nose, it's using some of that noble hop, so you're getting some of that spicy floral character, as opposed to that fruitiness that people associate with North American hops. Yeah, so really nice, really clean. You get that sort of malt body because it is a 5.5% beer, so it does have some character to back it up.
A little bit of hop bitterness.
A little bit of hop bitterness, but by no means is it on the...
keep it interesting?
Yeah, exactly. It's not on the German Pilsner side where it can be quite grippy and aggressive.
Yeah, it's a perfect patio drinker.
Yeah, totally.
All day long.
Pairs well with pretty much anything.
Yeah.
In particular, though, you could do it with like bratwurst or something like that, or sausages. Great barbecue beer.
Fattiness of that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the biggest things that beer has in terms of food pairing is carbonation. Scrubs your palate, and so it cuts through that fattiness, and hop bitterness also does the same. So the next beer we're tasting today is our Faller Northwest Pale Ale. So pale ale is obviously a classic style that's been around a long time, but it's kind of evolved in our region especially, whereas people's palates have evolved from going from looking for that caramelly kind of rich flavors in pale ale more into the pine and resiny kind of hop character. So this almost is like a light IPA is a better way to describe it as opposed to a pale ale, just because we found that as people's palates have evolved, they're looking for more hop forward beer.
Pushing the hop profile instead of the malt profile.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's still balanced, so it's definitely down the middle on that, but you're definitely getting a lot more hop characteristic than you would in, say, a traditional English pale ale, where it's all about that kind of bready, caramelly malt. So on the nose on this, you can right away pick up some of those. We tried to be, in the Pacific Northwest, we tried to focus on hops that have that kind of dank, foresty, piney, resiny character. But then, as you can see, it's quite balanced. It doesn't have that huge stringency on the back end, but there's definitely a hop flavor.
On the nose, there's tons of the dankness, tons of the hop, and then on the palate, there's some good well balance.
Yeah, well balanced on that.
And as we move along the hop spectrum, and head into your hazy. Tell us about this one.
This beer is actually a relatively recent, it came out just before the fall there actually, but it's a relatively recent beer that we put out. And we kind of saw a gap. Obviously, hazy IPAs are trending all over the place, but we kind of noticed that nobody on Vancouver Island was making one full time. So we decided to take that on.
This is a style that is we've seen massive growth in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
This style. It's really something that's kind of come out of nowhere, where traditionally we looked at beer and expected it to be clear. Mm-hmm. And this whole trend towards the hazy beer, what's the evolution of that, and where does it come from, and how does the beer come out hazy instead of clear?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started in New England, I guess you could say, that sort of East Coast. That was where it sort of started. So these brewers, I mean, these beers are, one of the biggest things with them is they're meant to be drunk fresh. They also, the malt that they use in the brewing process has a very high protein content. And then they'll also use some wheat, which gives a bit of haze as well. But the biggest thing is they're just very quick beers. So they ferment fast, they package them, and then they're gone like that. So they're meant to be drunk incredibly fresh. Ours is, we had the challenge of trying to make one that's on a production scale, which is a bit of difference, because a lot of the breweries, they kind of like, hey, we made 200 liters of this and it sold out in a day, and you're like, awesome. Whereas we had to be like, no, it needs to be stable for 6 months. So we've done a good job, lots of playing around with the recipe and lots of trying to balance things out. And it's funny because every single brewer, they want to make their beer clear, so it's very counterintuitive to make a hazy beer. But that's what
feels
the people
weird
want,
to them.
right?
and the whole idea behind these beers is that the hop character is a little softer, and we're pulling more of the fruit flavors out of the hops.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to the bitterness out of the hops.
Yeah.
Correct?
So when these beers first kind of came out, there was a lot of talk about this as a fad. And I was like, I don't think it's going to be a fad, because what it did is it made IPA approachable. Because a lot of people back in the day, and every person who's a craft beer lover is guilty of this, is first beer they give their non-craft beer loving friend is a huge IPA. They make the hop face.
You earn your way into West Coast IPAs.
Exactly.
Those aren't a natural progression. You have to earn your way into them.
Exactly. Yeah, you kind of got to run the gamut before you get used to it. So whereas this style, you're getting all those really juicy, fruity hop characteristics, but then it doesn't have the astringency. The mouthfeel is also a bit fuller, so it's just a really nice, approachable beer. So
that's a big thing that I always find with people who don't drink a lot of craft beer. They'll say to me, wow, this tastes very fruity. It tastes like an orange, so there must be orange added to that. And craft beer drinkers, as they're learning their way through styles, don't necessarily understand that this is actually just the hops that are adding those flavors. And it's just different times that you add the hops into the beer making process is what's going to define whether it's going to pull out more of the bitterness or whether it's going to pull out more of the fruit flavors.
Exactly.
So when you're adding hops with the hazy IPAs, is at what point in the wort production and the beer production are you adding the majority of the hops to be able to provide those more fruitful flavors?
Well, I mean, all of your bitterness comes at the beginning of the boil, essentially. So when you first get it into the kettle, so you add the majority of your bittering hops then, and then we basically add hops all throughout the brewing process in this one. So there's a whirlpool addition, so at the end of the boil, and then we're also adding a massive dry hop. And what happens when you dry hop a beer, so you're adding it basically post-fermentation, you're getting all of those characteristics of that hop out of there. So all those fruit flavors, all those things. If you put in those hops too early in the process, they'll basically, all those nice aromatics will evaporate. So you really want to have the dry hop go in as kind of the last step before you go into packaging, and that's how you get those big juicy flavors.
And the aroma.
Yeah, exactly.
And the dry hopping process, would you equate that similar to something like steeping tea?
Yeah, in a sense, yes. Yeah.
That it's being added in at the end.
Yeah, it's being added in for a short period. You don't want it too long, because otherwise it can get sort of vegetal or grassy notes. So it's kind of like a science to hit that sweet spot, but that's definitely how it would be. Basically throwing in some hops, letting it sit for a day or two, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, and then basically right after that going
into packaging.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, tell me, what am I going to smell in this? What am I going to taste?
This one, so Citra and Mosaic are the star hops on this one, which is quite a common hop combination.
You can really smell the Mosaic.
Yeah, so you get the Mosaic. Mosaic, it's one of those hops that's got like a real juicy, some people, for me, it's stone fruit. Some people get a lot of like a mango off of it, depending. It also varies on the crop. And then you get the Citra, which is obviously that nice, just lemon. but it's got a nice balanced mouthfeel. It doesn't have that astringency.
It's nice and soft, kind of pillowy mouthfeel through the middle.
Exactly.
Really like soft finish to it.
Yeah, and it doesn't sort of linger. There's no lingering bitterness on the palate of the back.
Yeah, no, just enough to cut through things a little bit, and then
exactly. So this beer has,
fruit.
it's absolutely taken off. It's the last 3 months has been our #1 seller out of our whole portfolio, which is kind of cool to have.
It's really
something take off
exciting
like
to
that.
see that people are embracing the new styles, and they're embracing IPAs, and they're moving their palates forward in the province quite significantly. And I think the hazy IPA has done a lot to introduce, as you said, a lot of non-craft beer drinkers to the market.
Yeah, big time. Well, it's that beer that you can kind of put in front of people that don't scare them off.
Yeah.
Where sometimes in craft beer, we all get a little overzealous and are like, here's something that's 9% alcohol.
Thank God for the lagers that are coming back.
Exactly.
All right, and then we're moving into some darker beers here. So what is the next one?
So the next beer we've got is our Dominion Dark Lager. This is a beer we've actually been making a very long time, but we changed the name of it a couple years back because we'd get some confusion with another beer that we make, which is called the Herminator. So we decided to change the name to Dominion. We didn't change the recipe all that much, to be honest, because it's won a ton of awards.
It's been around.
It's been around forever. It's well loved.
Yeah.
The style is Schwarzbier, which is a German style, so it's a dark lager. I'm a huge fan of this beer just because it gets, in a dark beer, one of the major flavor components that you're always going to get is like a chocolate and a coffee, those kind of flavors. But then sometimes when you have an ale, you'll get a bit of this yeast character which will come in, whereas in the lager, you're just going to get those flavors of the malt and the hops. So it's this really kind of intense flavors, but it finishes really dry and clean, and they're still quite a light body, because sometimes when you get into dark ales,
they start to get a bit heavier. So this is great for this, the changing season, being autumn right now.
Exactly.
This is a great beer to move into autumn, to pair with autumn style foods.
Fantastic food pairing beer. Anytime you have color in a beer, that's basically sugar that's been caramelized. So anything that's, got roasted, like any grilled meats or anything like that, are always going to work well with a darker beer.
And coffee and chocolate, who doesn't like either of those?
Exactly.
If you don't like either, I don't want to be friends with you.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so what are we smelling on this one?
So this one, the first thing I get is that kind of hit.
Tons of chocolate.
Chocolate, coffee too. Nice tan head on this one as well, but when you drink it, you get those flavors, but it's very light across the palate as well.
Super clean finish again.
Super
just
clean
a little bit
finish.
of chocolate on the finish too.
Yeah, again, that comes back to our brewing house, just because that's the way it was set up back in the day, but which is a huge asset, because a lot of breweries in their early days can shy away, for their smaller scale, can shy away from lagers because they take time and effort to make properly, whereas we have the time, effort, and space.
So the time difference. So we talked a little bit about the difference between a lager and an ale, and you've sort of noted on multiple occasions that lagers take longer.
Mm-hmm.
What is the standard production time for an ale versus a lager?
Yeah, I mean, ales can be turned around relatively quickly. You can have a 2-week ale. That's sort of our max that we like to go to if we're doing something on packaging, because they'll usually ferment in 3 to 5 days, and then it's just sort of a conditioning period.
Right.
Whereas our lagers, we do very traditional way. We do them, they ferment for 7 to 10 days, and then we also lager them, because that's essentially the word lager is the German word to store.
Yeah.
So we let them sit for a total of 28 days before we actually package them.
So you're a full month.
Yeah, exactly. So it really gives them time to sort of slowly chew through and just make that really clean, kind of crisp flavor.
So these two beers are in the month plus production time, 4 to 5 weeks.
Yep.
And then the other beers that you make are 2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3
sort of
weeks,
thing?
generally speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
I
love dark lager.
Yeah, it just won a BC place, or won 3rd place at the BC Beer Awards.
Right on, congratulations. Cheers to that.
Cheers.
All right, and our last
Delicious.
one, our big dark one on the finish
Yeah,
here. It's got a lot more viscosity, a lot more
Totally.
body to it. What's going on with this beer?
So this beer is a fun one. Last year, we do a thing called the Tidal Series, where we release a beer every 2 months throughout the year. It's our innovation pipeline. So the whole idea behind it is you never know what the tide will bring in. It's basically, it's where we get to play around, and we have a lot of fun. So we did a beer last February called the Nanaimo Bar Imperial Porter. So obviously the Nanaimo Bar is that iconic Canadian dessert, and being Vancouver Island Brewing, we were like, well, we should make a beer based on that. So we made this beer, and it was 8.2%. It had just massive notes of cocoa and vanilla and graham cracker. It was amazing beer. It was so popular that we sold every drop before we even got into cans, before we even packaged it. And then it just literally evaporated. And since that beer came out, we've literally had people asking us almost every single day,
about
can I get some more of it? Yeah. So
that's a good problem to have.
Exactly. So we seized the opportunity and we looked at it and we're like, you know what, let's just make this a 6-month seasonal. So that's what we did. But 8.2% can be a little aggressive.
It's a big beer.
Yeah, exactly. So we did a lot of work to basically make sure that we could hold on to that body and all of those characteristics, but we brought the alcohol down 2%.
Dial it down about.
Yeah. So it's 6.2 now, but you're still getting that vanilla, that cocoa, the coconuts, graham cracker, all those things.
So I'm going to smell all those things and taste all those things? Is that what I should expect?
Generally speaking. The only thing that with this beer that we didn't want to do is make it sweet. Because that's something that it's got a sweetness to it, but it's definitely not a sweet beer. It's more of it's your brain tricking your mouth into thinking it will be sweet until you drink it.
It starts off with this sort of a creaminess at the center of the Nanaimo Bar. You get a little bit of that.
Like custard, yeah.
And then you kind of move into the like coconut and the dark cocoa and the vanilla on the finish. And it really it's quite the evolution, this beer, as to like what it's doing on my palate.
Yeah, and this one, to be honest, is one that I like to drink at about 7 to 10 degrees because I find it warms it up a bit and you get a lot more of those nuanced flavors coming out. But yeah, it's a pretty neat beer.
It really changes.
Yeah. Oh, especially if you warm it up over, say, pour a big glass of it, and over the experience of drinking it, you'll start to pick up more and more things as it evolves.
So Dave, thanks so much for having me in today and talking me through your beers. Last big banger of a question. What's your favorite beer?
My favorite question. The one in my hand is the short answer.
Excellent answer.
The long answer is, where am I? What am I doing? What's the weather? What am I eating? What's the occasion?
Who am I with?
Yeah, who am I with? Because it's if it's a hot, sunny day and I'm floating down a river in a tube versus a cold winter's night in front of a fire, they're two completely
very different
answers. Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the greatest things about beer, don't you find, is that there's so much that goes into the enjoyment of that liquid and that contributes to your experience with the liquid. It's the music playing, it's the friends that you're with, it's the fire or the ocean, or it's an entire sensory experience of what's going on around you as to what you're going to enjoy.
Yeah, I actually have a term for it I call occasional or situational pairing. Yeah. Is how I kind of look at what I'm going to drink in different beers in different situations.
And the greatest thing is that beer is kind of what brings us all together, right?
Yeah, totally.
Anyone can sit down and share beer, and it certainly sparks lively debates and interesting conversations, and a lot of great ideas come out over a couple of pints of beer.
It is the funnest industry to be in. I'm not quite sure how I got here. I'm going to stay here. Yeah.
Never leaving.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me.
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thanks
Always
so much,
great to see you.
Cheers, you too.